Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the third APUSH prep webinar that I'm offering in cooperation with the Bill of Rights Institute. Now, there is a link in the description where you can learn more about Bill of Rights Institute APUSH prep webinars. We're delivering 9 of them. This is going to be the third of 9. Now, what happened is we've been using Adobe Connect. It was giving us a little bit of trouble, and I just said, hey, how about I do tonight's webinar at the out on my YouTube channel, okay, so that I can bring my YouTube audience in on this. But make sure to know that while I've got all kinds of great stuff on my YouTube channel, the Bill of Rights Institute also has a lot of great stuff. You want to click on that link because I'm going to be doing 6 more of these between tonight and the exam, and you want to make sure that you know where to access these, okay? So this is going to be a little bit different. I'm offering it on my YouTube channel, but this is not going to be the standard location. Now, tonight we are going to be looking at early national America, the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution, and Jefferson, Hamilton, Washington, all of that kind of stuff, about the period between about 1783 and 1800. Those of you who like to use numbered periods, this is the latter half of the so-called period 3. I'm not really a big fan of numbered periods. Numbered period numbers never show up on the exam. That's something to think about there. So as far as this goes, we've got a few people here. All right, I can read the chat. Now, the thing is, I may, if this chat gets too out of hand, sometimes YouTube chats do that, I may be looking at my Twitter, might be a little bit better because, I can't really necessarily, I can't necessarily change that. I can't kick people out of here because I'm going to be doing my thing here. Okay, so as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, we've got some people here, and it's awesome, and this is going to be great. All right, so let's go ahead and continue to go. How do you ask questions? If you want to ask questions, I will look at this chat, but keep in mind sometimes it can get really, really messy. Okay, my Twitter. Okay, let's see. What am I doing? Oh, oops. Okay, why is it going to my, okay. All right, so ladies and oh, oops. Okay, so for some reason, all right, just let me get this all set up here. All right, so what we're doing here is we're going to start with the Articles of Confederation, then we're going to look at the Constitution, and then a little bit about Jefferson and Hamilton. Now, let's go into the Articles of Confederation, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll go ahead and chat about that first and kind of go over the main things about that. Okay, which, remember the national motto, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. And that is a big deal for early national America, figuring out the extent to which the United States is pluribus and the extent to which the United States is unum. Now, as far as this goes, ladies and gentlemen, the Articles of Confederation were America's first constitution. Now, first of all, Benjamin Franklin published this cartoon during the French and Indian War. And in this cartoon, he said, join or die, that basically the colonies had never cooperated with each other. And then you look at the seal of the United States, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. Now, what we've got to do is we've got to establish the context of the Articles of Confederation. So the context of the Articles of Confederation is that we have, let's see, just one second. Let me make sure I'm, good with the Bill of Rights Institute here. All right, so as far as this goes, ladies and gentlemen, the context here for the Articles of Confederation is that they've just been out through this war, okay? You've had Parliament, which was this foreign legislature that could legislate for them. And these states were very jealous of their newfound liberties. And the states were very, very hesitant to give any more power to this government than, was absolutely necessary. So the Articles of Confederation formed a very weak and minimalist plan for government that was replaced less than a decade later by the Constitution. Now, let's look at the Treaty of Paris, 1783. Now, remember, the Treaty of Paris, 1763, ended the French and Indian War. 20 years later, the Treaty of Paris, 1783, which ended the American Revolution. Paris is a great place to make peace. There was also a Treaty of Paris that ended the Spanish Spanish-American War. So you see here that in the Treaty of Paris, His Britannic Majesty acknowledges the said United States and names all of the states separately: free, sovereign, and independent states. And this is the kind of attitude that the states are going in with into the Articles of Confederation, that you've got these 13 free, sovereign, and independent states. Sovereignty is where ultimate power resides. So in the Articles of Confederation, the sovereignty resides very, very clearly with the states, okay? And right after Article 1, which says we're going to call this the United States of America. And so Article 2 of the Articles of Confederation says each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States and Congress assembled. Now, you can already see, why the anti-federalists during ratification opposed the Constitution. Why the Jeffersonians in the early national period, why they continued to really see the United States more in the light of pluribus than in the light of unum. And so federalism, this is something very important, especially, hold on to this for AP government. Some of y'all are taking AP government concurrently, and you've got two levels of government here: the federal government and state governments, and they each have their own spheres where they have power and they share some powers. Now, federalism, according to the articles, is that the state governments delegated foreign relations to the federal government. Now, remember, a delegated power, the states are really holding the power and they're delegating. Like, I can't delegate something to my principal because my principal is above me in the hierarchy. My principal can delegate something to me. So the states here are saying, federal government, we want you to take care of foreign relations, making treaties, making war, maintaining an army and a navy, sending ambassadors, stuff like that. But we don't want you to go beyond that, okay? And so really what I think of when I think about the Articles of Confederation, I think of a military alliance is what I'm thinking about. So you consider, what would things be like if we had a military alliance, and that's basically it. And remember that the words here in the Articles of Confederation: a firm league of friendship, not a more perfect union, as we'll see in the Constitution. So a firm league of friendship. Every state got equal representation. The small states, the large states, equal representation, because we're an alliance. And in an alliance, everybody gets an equal seat at the table, no matter how big or how small. It was very difficult to legislate, almost impossible to amend. Make sure you understand that the Articles of Confederation, in order to amend it, all 13 states had to agree on this, and it is difficult to get 13 individuals to agree on something, much less 13 states. And so the problem here is that you want your Constitution to be difficult to amend, but you don't want it to be impossible to amend. So this causes quite a bit of trouble. Now, also, there's no presidency and there is no court system. Everything goes to the national legislature. So as far as that goes, remember that also this government did not have the power to tax. Only the states had the power to tax. And so as far as that goes, besides these very limited powers of foreign relations, there's really nothing going on here. It is basically a military alliance. Now, the successes of the articles were not without success. The articles were created during the war, and the United States did win the war. So it was effective in coordinating this military alliance between these free, sovereign, and independent states. Also, the Northwest Territory, this land that was, out west, out past the Appalachian Mountains, what we think of today as the Midwest, which is why they call it the Midwest, even though it's to the east. But the Northwest Territory, what are we going to do with that? And several states ceded land in this area. And so when we look at what's going on here, we see the cessions of land. And also, the goal here is that new states are going to be created. And also that this territory was going to be outlawed as far as slavery. There was going to be no slavery in the Northwest Territory. Now, remember, as we were talking about yesterday, after the American Revolution, the northern states got rid of slavery, started passing gradual emancipation laws. And so the conventional wisdom at that time, before the cotton gin, really brought American slavery to a whole new level of economic output. A lot of people believe that eventually slavery is going to go away. Slavery is a problem in a Republican government, and eventually it's going to go away. And so the Northwest Ordinance is seen as the greatest success of the Articles. Okay. Now, as far as the problems with the Articles of Confederation, you're looking at a bad economy. You may remember from your studies of the American Revolution, these continental notes, this paper currency, and people would say something's not worth a continental. It wasn't backed by anything. And so this bad economy leads to social unrest. Shays' Rebellion, which takes place for about 6 months in Massachusetts. These were, farmers, a lot of them Continental Army veterans, and they are rebelling because they want paper money. They believe there's this shortage of currency. And so you've got the creditors versus the debtors. Okay. And so these Western Massachusetts farmers, they are fighting against these creditors, these Boston merchants. And so a lot of the elites are very, very, uneasy about this. Okay. So, as far as this goes, the elite consensus is that we need more government. Okay. Madison said, look, I mean, things are getting really, really bad, that the existing Confederacy is tottering to its foundation. George Washington said that, anarchy and confusion, got to get rid of these things. He says everything will be turned topsy-turvy if we have more of this anarchy and confusion. And so then, now remember, although there are the elites there, then there's Jefferson. Okay. Jefferson, a man of the Enlightenment. We talked about the Enlightenment yesterday and talked about, the importance of rationality to the Enlightenment. So Jefferson, does the math. I mean, he's a reasonable guy. And he's like, look, I mean, basically, we've been independent for 11 years. We have 13 states. So if you put Shays' Rebellion into perspective, then you get about a rebellion in about 143 years. That's about 150 years per state. So while Shays' Rebellion, you've got this going on in Massachusetts, the other states are seeing relative peace. And so Jefferson didn't see nearly as big of a problem as, Madison and Washington and other elites, and Abigail Adams as well, was horrified. Of course, she was there in Massachusetts. Jefferson said, malo periculosum libertatem quam quietum servitutum, which says that I prefer the tumult of liberty to the quiet of servitude. Jefferson says, you know what? I would rather there be a rebellion once in a while than to be in a situation where we're answering to some arbitrary and tyrannical government. And so, as far as that goes, you see here that the solution to this problem is the Constitution. And so that is championed by the writers of the Federalist Papers, okay, who are pointing out that there are these problems, not just economic problems, but problems of, as far as the British still had forts, okay, in this area, basically in American territory that they were supposed to abandon. Now, the British had these forts, but they were supposed to abandon them, but we didn't really have anything to coerce them. Okay. We didn't have much of a military or anything like that. And so Alexander Hamilton wrote in Federalist 15, which these are, written in order to get people to support the Constitution. He says that we have reached the last stage of national humiliation. We also had a territorial dispute with Spain, and Hamilton saying that our government is not strong enough, to handle this. Okay. So as far as this goes, when we look at the Articles of Confederation versus the Constitution, So let's go ahead and just take a look here and be able to compare the Articles and the Constitution. Now, instead of a firm league of friendship, friendship, friends come and go. Now, a more perfect union, a union is more permanent. We typically use this word to refer to a marriage or something like that. And so the sovereignty in the Constitution is a shared sovereignty. Now, there are some forms of continuity. Okay. So when you look at the Senate continues the tradition of equal representation, whereas the House continue, or I mean, yeah, the Senate continues equal representation, whereas in the House of Representatives, the larger states get more than the, more representation than the smaller states. Now, the federal government will have the ability to tax, which will help the economy and help establish this federal government. Because when it comes down to it, a government with no power to tax is really no government at all. And I say that as somebody who's not the biggest fan of government in general. And so, in addition, okay, now what you want to note here are these additional powers. Okay, so in addition to this, to these foreign relations powers, taxation, interstate commerce, currency, and being able to crush rebellions, okay, rebellions and insurgencies and stuff like that, and insurrections. This government will have the power to do that, as you can see demonstrated in the Whiskey Rebellion during the Washington administration. And so, as far as legislation, what we have here is the Senate and the House, plus the concurrence of the president. So it is difficult to legislate, but not necessarily that you need 2/3 of the states to approve of this. Now, also the amendment process, okay, that you've got 2/3 of Congress necessary of both houses, plus 3/4 of the states. So instead of it being unanimous, now if there's a general agreement on something, then we can probably get 3/4 of the states to go along with it. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, I'm a little bit scared sometimes to look at YouTube comments, but let's go ahead and take a quick look here at the comment section and make sure I'm addressing everything that needs to be addressed. All right, so as far as that goes, all right, what have we got here? All right, let's see. Yeah, Brianna, however you say that, bless you, telling people to buy my app. Yeah, so I'm looking at the questions. Okay, so yeah, I will get to that. I will get to that. Yeah, so I'm going to look here and I see that we want to see ratification in the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist, right? Okay, so as far as that goes, we will go ahead and address that. So yeah, so let me go ahead. It looks like I've got people are people are questioning things that I'm going to get to. So let me go ahead now. Raj, yeah, the only issue is I may go a little bit slower, but yeah, I do have a limit as far as these are lasting an hour. And so as far as that goes, let me go ahead and go to the Philadelphia Convention. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up the Philadelphia Convention and go over just a few things here. Now, again, I'm painting over with a broad brush and that sort of thing. But let me go ahead and, go into the compromises reached at the Constitutional Convention. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that. Tell your friends that we're here. Okay, so remember, tomorrow we'll be back at the Bill of Rights Institute, assuming we can get the problems out of the way with the music. So make sure to click the link if you're an APUSH student wanting. We're going to be broadcasting 6 more times with the Bill of Rights Institute. So make sure if you want to see more of these and you stumbled across this on my channel that you click there. Okay, so let's go ahead and share my screen again and chat about the Constitutional Convention. All right, so the Constitutional Convention, and I'm going to be going through here, skipping over some things, and just noting that. Now, the elite consensus was that the articles were not working. Okay, the articles were not working. You had a bad economy, and you've also got the problem of Shays' Rebellion. And so then there are also trade barriers. There are trade barriers among the states that, North Carolina could think, well, you know what? We grow tobacco here. We don't want to import Virginia tobacco. So we're going to put a tax on the Virginia tobacco. And so there are some of the states that are starting to put like import taxes on things from other states. So the economy is not going great, and they want to get rid of some of these barriers to economic cooperation within the states. So the Annapolis Convention happens in 1786, which basically leads to let's meet again next year with more people. Only about 4 or 5 states were represented at the Annapolis Convention. So they meet again in Philadelphia. Now, this is in 1787. And some of these years are kind of good to know, at least know that this is going on in the 1780s. 1789 is the year that the Constitution was ratified. And so the stated purpose of the Philadelphia Convention was to amend the Articles. Now, yes, that's pretty funny when we look at what they actually did, right? They came up with a brand new plan of government, that they made it from scratch. All right. Now, the key to understanding the compromises at the Constitutional Convention is if we look at it in terms of large state, small state, slave state, free state. All right. The compromises that were reached there, the major compromises that you need to know for your exam, were a compromise between the large states and the small states, and then another between the slave states and the free states. And so when we look at the 1790 census, we can see that, the population of the northern and the southern states at this time was roughly equal. And now the thing is, though, in order for that to be roughly equal, that had to include slaves. And so, as far as that goes, if the South is going to have any kind of it's not going to be a minority in this, in this arrangement, then there's going to be the issue of, slave representation that's going to come up. Also, the small states are very afraid because they've been getting influence that is disproportional. Like if you look at the 5 smallest states, they are still not as large as Virginia. So if we were to look at Georgia, Delaware, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, and New Jersey, those states together don't add up, as long as I'm not doing my math wrong, which I've been known to do sometimes. But you look at those 5 states, they only add up to 15% of the population. Virginia's got 20% of the population, but at the same time, about a third of that population, over a third, it looks like, is Virginia's slave population. So let's take a look at that, setting up the legislative branch. Okay, so you had the Virginia plan submitted by James Madison. Now, James Madison is often referred to as the father of the Constitution. And so James Madison came up with this plan for a bicameral legislature, and both houses of this legislature would be based on population. Now, if we look at POV here, we're seeing that, of course, Virginia is a large state. They are wanting this in order that their interest will be, most powerful there. Now, the New Jersey plan, which New Jersey was one of the smaller states, that's William Patterson, whose name will probably not be on your exam, came up with a plan for a unicameral legislature, 1 vote per state. Now, some of y'all are probably familiar with the concept of trolling, okay? And it seems to me like, the New Jersey plan is a classic example of trolling, because it's like we came over here to amend the articles, and then it's like, you know what? How about we have the exact same thing that's already in the articles? And so that is Patterson's New Jersey plan. So as far as how do we share things, the large states, like when my wife and I are sharing a dessert, I might think, we need to share this. I need to get a little more of it because I'm bigger than you are. And she's probably thinking, we should split this equally because we're 2 people after all. Now, just a quick aside here that we want to note. Now, remember that this was totally confidential. The Constitution was created at a confidential meeting. And so Alexander Hamilton of New York takes the floor, and he proposed a plan. for a national government, a government that will get rid of the, I mean, it'll keep the states, but the states will be subsidiary to the federal government, kind of like counties are subsidiaries of state governments. And so Hamilton's plan was to get rid of state sovereignty entirely and to create a national government. And so, to just get rid of that. And you can see now, Hamilton, the people don't know what Hamilton's saying here. Okay. Now, the thing is, when Hamilton is writing the Federalist Papers, of course, that's anonymous as well, but I think people kind of know what's going on there. That Hamilton, when he writes the Federalist Papers, he's going to write things like a Bill of Rights isn't necessary because the federal government's powers are already limited, which he knows what he's doing. Hamilton is trying to create the reason Hamilton, was a Federalist and wanting to ratify the Constitution. The Constitution ended up not being anywhere near what Hamilton wanted, but he saw that it gave the federal government more power and it was something that he can work with. But remember that this is where Hamilton's starting off. This is Hamilton's ideal. Whereas, Jefferson's ideal is, the Articles on steroids, maybe make the Articles a little stronger, but not much. So that's important to note here that Hamilton was very upfront with the kind of government that he wanted, not a federal government where sovereignty is shared, but a national government where all sovereignty is held by the federal government. Now, the convention heard Hamilton's plan. They did not debate it. And so as far as that goes, you've got the so-called Great Compromise, and that is where you have the Senate and the House of Representatives. Now, on one hand, you've got one house that is based on population, another house that is apportioned by state, 2 per state. Now, the other thing we want to note here is that the House of Representatives was going to be directly elected by the voters, whereas the Senate would be appointed by state legislatures, indirect. The Senate would be the upper house, and it would be the more aristocratic house that would keep the House of Representatives from going too far. Okay. Now, the House of Representatives also needs to be there too. So you've got this system where the needs of the elite are balanced against the needs of the people who aren't part of the elite. And remember that, that legislatures continue to be appointed, senators continue to be appointed by state legislatures until the 17th Amendment was passed during the Progressive Era. I've got a video on Progressive Era amendments if you want to take a look at that. So now the next question, should slaves be counted for purposes of representation in the lower house of Congress? And so when it comes down to that, the southern states thought that, well, yes, they should be. After all, they're people, right? Well, actually, no, they didn't consider them as people. They considered them property. How far are we going to go with this if we're going to count property for representation? Now, the thing to note about the Constitutional Convention is no doubt the folks up, from the North were not happy about this, but the only way that the South was going to come into an arrangement where, you had one house that was apportioned based on population was if there was some representation for slaves. And so for representation in Congress, slaves would count as 3/5 of a person. And this would basically balance out, and, the slave states would have, would share power with the free states. They wouldn't be a minority at that time. Now, what does the North get for that? After 20 years, Congress will have the power to regulate, that is to be read outlaw, the international slave trade. Now, the thing is here, remember that the conventional wisdom about slavery at this time, we're going to outlaw the slave trade. Slavery is going to go away. Now, they didn't take into account some of the new technologies that are going to come out, in a few decades, like the cotton gin, and also that, there was a natural, increase in the number of slaves slaves in the United States, which was different from the Caribbean, where the death rates exceeded the birth rates. In the Caribbean, you cut off the slave trade and slavery's over in a number of years. And so that's the 3/5 compromise, okay? And of course, they decide to create a president, which is a figurehead for the government, elected by the Electoral College. Now, remember that the presidency was never supposed to be this media circus with this big popular election and campaign rallies and all of that kind of stuff. The Electoral College was made to try to keep the president, basically insulate the presidency from the people, okay? So as far as that goes, now the other thing here is the judicial branch, okay? So the judicial branch is created, a Supreme Court is created. Now there wasn't a whole lot of elaboration here, all right? The Supreme Court is going to exist basically, and Congress would decide, basically that the judges shall hold their offices on good behavior, so they'll hold it for life as long as they're behaving themselves, and all of that. Now you see here, there will be a Supreme Court. The Constitution doesn't say how many justices will be on the Supreme Court. That's set by Congress, if any of you remember FDR's court packing plan. All right. And then the Commerce Clause. Now, the Commerce Clause is very important here, okay, because this comes up time and time again throughout U.S. history. Okay. So the Commerce Clause, the Congress shall have the power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes, okay? So basically, interstate commerce, okay? Congress will control interstate commerce. Now, intrastate commerce within a state, that's going to be controlled by the state. But if it goes between states or if it's foreign trade, Congress will regulate this. So this will create an economic union between the states of the United States. Okay, so that is really part of the point here. So this Commerce Clause is very, very important. All right, so as far as that goes, let me go ahead and stop sharing for a bit and see if we can take some questions from some folks. Now, as far as this goes, let me also let me just show quickly maybe a little bit about the principles of the Constitution. Now, more powers being given to the federal government, right? But at the same time, there are separation of powers, okay, and checks and balances. That comes from Montesquieu. You might want to remember that. All right, let me go ahead and take a look at the question here. All right, so what are we talking? Gibbons versus Ogden. We'll cover the Marshall Court tomorrow. Okay, so we're gonna, yes, but Gibbons versus Ogden did address the Commerce Clause. My favorite color is blue. All right. And so as far as this is going, now what we want to think about here, okay, is the continuity aspect. All right. So in the ratification debate, you had the Federalist versus the Anti-Federalist, okay? The Federalist versus the Anti-Federalist. And the Anti-Federalist, what they were afraid of, they were afraid that the Constitution was going to create a national government, a government that was too powerful. And so they're afraid of that. The Anti-Federalists are very afraid of this, of this overly powerful federal government. And they also believe this is going to create a type of monarchy. It's going to create a hierarchical society. And so the Anti-Federalists are afraid. They believe the Constitution will compromise the rights of the states. And so a lot of folks are uneasy about this. And so the Anti-Federalists are convinced that the Constitution is not federal, that it does not create a role for the states, and that it was also not Republican in nature, that it was not going to create a Republican form of government. If you signed up, those of you who want to, those of you who want the study guide, if you sign up at the Bill of Rights Institute, there is a link in the video description. If you sign up there, then you are going to, you're going to get on their mailing list, and you should have stuff shared with you. Okay, so make sure about that. Tomorrow we're going to be, we're going to be back on the Bill of Rights Institute. Hopefully we'll figure out what was going on with the background music. Now, the Federalists, okay, what they had to do. Now, this is something you can kind of think of when Woodrow Wilson, and you think about the Treaty of Versailles, that Woodrow Wilson could either compromise with the reservationists, with the people who are like, you know what, we're not against the treaty in general, but we're against this specific treaty, okay? And so Wilson could have compromised with them and accepted some reservations, but he chose not to. And the Treaty of Versailles failed. Now, it's a different situation here when you look at what's going on with the Constitution, because the Federalists, all right, the Federalists, they wanted the Constitution as it was coming out of Philadelphia. That's what they wanted. But the moderate anti-federalists said that we will support this Constitution if it's amended, what we call the Bill of Rights. Okay, if a Bill of Rights can be added to the Constitution to limit the government, then we will support that Constitution. And so this, let's see, my PowerPoints are not wanting to cooperate with me. Let me close a couple things out and see what happens there. All right. So as far as this goes, it's important to note that not only was the Constitution, the Constitutional Convention, a compromise, but the constitutional ratification was also a compromise. And so as far as that, the Bill of Rights basically made the Constitution, it provided continuity. Okay, so when we want to think about continuity and discontinuity, if we're comparing the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. Now, I was going to do a causation prompt, but I think I might also do another comparison prompt. Those tend to be pretty popular. So let's think about this, okay? As far as comparison, evaluate the extent to which the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution were different from each other, okay? And so what I'm going to do here, all right, let's go ahead and share my screen so that y'all can see what I'm doing here. LEQ. Now, my LEQ setup always goes along the lines of these boxes. Okay, so what I want to do here, now what we're going to do here is the Articles, okay, and then the Constitution, and then we see here unique to the Articles, and then here unique to the Constitution. And so in this box, we're going to look at the Articles, in this box, the Constitution, and in this box, we're going to say that these are the things that were common to both. So as far as what's unique to the Articles, what we might think of is, state sovereignty, right? So we think in terms of state sovereignty. Basically foreign relations only, no taxation power, no commerce clause. Okay, so basically what we see here is this, as I was mentioning, this firm league of friendship. Okay, so what we think in this case of a firm league of friendship. Now, then here, we're thinking in terms of, for the Constitution, we're thinking in terms of a more perfect union. Okay, so instead of a firm league of friendship, a more perfect union. And so what we're seeing there is shared sovereignty. Okay, and we see here that not only do we have foreign relations powers, but also economic powers. Okay, so economic powers, you say you have the commerce clause, and of course you have the taxation power. Now, what do they both have in common? Now, what is common to both is the anti-federalist claim that the Constitution is going to create a national government that is going to run roughshod over the rights of the people and the states. But what we could say here is that both created a federal government. Okay, so neither the Articles nor the Constitution created a government that was fully national in scope. So both of them created a federal government, basically both reserved rights to the states and that sort of thing. So when it comes down to it, if you're looking for complex understanding, when you think about the commonality here, what I would use for evidence here, I would say the Bill of Rights. I would possibly even talk about specifically the 10th Amendment. Okay, so Amendment 10, which says that essentially powers that are not delegated to the states. Now, it's a little bit lighter than the language used in the articles, but the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Okay, so the 10th Amendment here really sets the tone here that the states, so now there was nowhere in the original Constitution that said the states reserve rights that are not specifically, in the Constitution. So what you see here is some continuity between the articles and the Constitution. Now, of course, when you look at the debates between Jefferson and Hamilton, you see that Hamilton is thinking more along the lines of this more perfect union, a stronger central government, whereas Jefferson thinks much more in terms of what is it that, the Constitution is not fundamentally different from the Articles of Confederation. Now, before chatting a little bit about Jefferson and Hamilton, let's see what we've got going on here. Okay, all right, so yeah, now what's important to remember is that, yes, it's not like the Federalist one or the Anti-Federalist one, that the ratification of the Constitution was about compromise, okay? And so as far as that goes there, yes, I'm actually going to be, performing live with Mr. Betts on Sunday in Miami, and it's going to be pretty awesome. I'll be with Mr. Betts' class Sunday in Miami. Jefferson. Okay, now what's important here is that Jefferson, I've actually got a video called Jefferson and the Constitution. If you search YouTube for Jefferson and the Constitution, let's see, Jefferson and the Constitution. You'll see here, this is actually, I'm going to link this video here and I'll put it in the comments, okay? That this video, what I do here is I go into Jefferson's initial reaction to the Constitution. And so Jefferson, he told Madison that he liked a lot of things about the Constitution. Jefferson wasn't like a hard anti-federalist, okay? But Jefferson, yes, the thing is, what we've got to note here is that Jeffersonian Republicans, and Jessica, I love that you're using good, sophisticated terminology and not calling it the Democratic Republican Party. I think Jeffersonian Republican just sounds a lot more sophisticated and a little bit more accurate. So Jessica, thank you so much for using my preferred terminology. Now, of course, you can use Democratic Republican as well. I just have some issues with that terminology. So as far as that goes, that Jefferson said, I like that we've restructured the legislature. I like the three branches of government. He said, what I don't like is that there's a lack of a Bill of Rights, because every state constitution, had a Bill of Rights. And so as far as that goes, don't leave, Jenny. We don't want you to leave. All right. So as far as that goes, let's go ahead and take a look at the conflicts between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. But I mean, Jefferson, certainly, if you had been an anti-federalist, you would join Jefferson's party. But what's important to note here as well, though, is that, Madison was a Federalist when it came to the ratification of the Constitution, but he did not agree with Hamilton. Once the Constitution was ratified, Madison went over to Jefferson as BFF. It's like there is a bedroom at Monticello called the Madison bedroom. And this bedroom is, this bedroom is basically named because James and Dolly Madison spent so much time over there. And so even though I'm sure other guests use that room, they call it the Madison bedroom. They were like this. Now, Jefferson was more of a states' rights guy than Madison, I think. But as far as that goes, Madison, when he saw what Hamilton, after cooperating with Hamilton to write the Federalist, Madison decides, you know what? Now I see Hamilton's true colors, and I'm going to go over to my friend Jefferson because I trust him more. But they did work together to ratify the Constitution. So just remember that, you know, there were some people who favored the ratification of the Constitution, people like Madison, the father of the Constitution, who then joined Jefferson. All right, so as far as this goes, very important that we understand the differences between Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. So let's go into the basis of the first two-party system. And with that, let's see. So Jefferson versus Hamilton, the first two-party system. Remember to hydrate, everybody. It's key this time of year. So 1791 to 1816 was the first two-party system. That you've got the Federalist Party led by Alexander Hamilton initially, and of course John Adams being an early leader of this party, and the Jeffersonian Republican Party. Now, I prefer Jeffersonian Republican, but some people use the term Democratic Republican. And I think the exam is actually that the College Board with this redesign has given up on appropriate terminology. You know, they used to say, they used to say Jeffersonian Republican, but it doesn't look like, they do that anymore. All right. So as far as that goes, the first two-party system, the leaders being here, Hamilton and Jefferson. Now, Adams and Madison are also very important here. When it comes to their understanding of federalism, Hamilton wanted a strong central government, whereas Jefferson was a believer in states' rights. And their fears, okay, that really the Federalists, they fear anarchy and mob rule, whereas the Jeffersonians, what they feared was tyranny. Okay, they feared tyranny. Just a second. Just need to answer they need to answer a text from my wife. Never ignore your wife, ladies and gentlemen. Do that at your own peril. So the Constitution, their understanding of the Constitution is that Hamilton was a loose construction guy. Now, I'm not a fan of Comic Sans at all, but there are a few times where it may be appropriate to use Comic Sans. It's very, very rare. But when we think about loose construction, it's a very Comic Sansy view of the Constitution, whereas Jefferson's construction was more strict. The Constitution says what it says, and the federal government doesn't have any powers beyond what is there in the Constitution and is necessary, okay, is necessary. Whereas, the elastic clause, the necessary and proper clause. Now, Hamilton emphasizes in their debates over the bank the proper part of it. Jefferson says, is it necessary? Now, their support base that Hamilton had, the commercial and financial elite and in urban areas, where Jefferson appeared to appeal to more rural areas. Now, what we've got to understand about the country at this time is that the United States was 95% rural at this time. So it's, basically Washington, even though he was technically nonpartisan, Washington and John Adams threw their weight behind Hamilton in the end. And so Jefferson eventually, wins in 1800 and starts a period of dominance by his party. But that was something that, at first the Federalists are, they're promoting their program in a country whose demographics really aren't that favorable to it. Now, this is the thing that basically Hamilton believed that the government should play a key role in economic development. Now, Hamilton's successor in the next generation is going to be Henry Clay with his American system. And so then as far as Jefferson, Jefferson and Madison believed in a laissez-faire economy, so that there should be no government involvement in the economy. And so the National Bank, this isn't a power listed in the Constitution. So if you're a strict constructionist, you believe in laissez-faire economies, and you are a fan of states' rights. You don't believe in this national bank, which is never in the Constitution, favors the financial sectors and compromises the rights of the states, which in, Andrew Jackson's veto of the recharter of the Second Bank of the United States, more than anything else, Jackson's veto was about that this national bank as it existed, violated the rights of the states. So this was the biggest conflict between Jefferson and Hamilton, was over the national bank. Now Washington ended up siding with Hamilton and deciding that this was a necessary and proper power. Now, a protective tariff. Hamilton wanted a protective tariff in order to protect American manufacturing. Hamilton's passion is for manufacturing. Jefferson's passion is for farms. Should the federal government assume state war debts? Remember, these free, sovereign, and independent states during the American Revolution, they ran up their own debts. And Hamilton put together a plan where the federal government would take all of the state debts. Now, Jefferson opposed this, but later came around when Hamilton offered to move the capital out of New York City, the financial center of the country, and to a site on the Potomac River where Jefferson could keep an eye on it. So Hamilton does get the federal assumption of state war debts. Hamilton doesn't get a protective tariff per se. You still have pretty low tariffs during this time. And so Jefferson does not want, this increases the role of the federal government. Now, Hamilton's thinking in terms of this is going to bring the states together to share debt. So Jefferson was very suspect of this, kind of like, it's going to make everybody bind together. Whereas if they don't share debt, maybe this thing won't work and people will leave too early for it to take root. Now, as far as foreign policy, Hamilton was an Anglophile. He liked England, okay? He liked the British. And so, the Anglophiles versus the Jeffersonians were Francophiles. They were big, big fans of the French Revolution. Not that Jefferson wanted to bring the guillotine to America, but, the French are trying to set up a republic. And Jefferson was, wanted the United States to be supportive of that. Now, the Battle of New Orleans and the War of 1812 pretty much killed the Federalist Party because of the Hartford Convention. And so the War of 1812 killed this. I have a website. The Bill of Rights Institute has a website as well, so make sure to visit that. And speaking of the Bill of Rights Institute, let me, if my friend there at the Bill of Rights Institute could text me and let me know when is it that we're planning on stopping, because I'm sure we'll go a few minutes after, since we were a little bit late starting. All right. So as far as that stuff, let's see here. Okay, great. Okay. At least they know I know where France is. All right. Well, Caroline, that's very good. All right. So let's talk about, just to kind of wrap up, now, one thing is that, okay, Alan Ross, actual student alert. Good to see you here. All right, glad my actual students are actually thinking about the exam now. I'm very, very pleased with that. Now, an LEQ prompt could also read something like this. Okay, let's talk about causation real quick. Okay, so. All right. So yes. Okay. So there's Rachel. Let's see okay. So we're going to run this broadcast until 7:40. Okay. So we've got a little bit of time here. All right. So what I want to do here is I want to show y'all an LEQ prompt and kind of show you how I might set that up. Now I've got the same kind of boxes that I set up for any prompt. All right. So let's just throw something up here. The prompt that I'm going to show y'all here is a causation prompt. Now, causation prompts, they will say, evaluate the extent to which this influenced or caused this. So what I would say here is evaluate the extent to which economic issues influenced the development of the first two-party system between 1789 and 1800, okay? And so the thing is that our emphasis would be on economic causes. Now, we would also look at other causes, okay? So while I'm putting down some economic causes in the chat there, if y'all could go, maybe list a few other causes, if you were to think that, like, something other than economic. Now, here is where we could put effects. Okay, we could put effects. Now, as far as that goes, economic causes, I might go into, basically Jefferson and Hamilton on manufacturing. Okay, so manufacturing versus farming. And then you could get into the national bank. Now, the other thing here, if we're thinking about another cause, okay, so let me just take a quick look here. And yes, so the bank definitely. Now, the bank, we could go into, this is the causes of the rise of the first two-party system. So basically, evaluate the extent to which economic issues influence the development of the first two-party system. Now, so we would see the national bank. That is an economic issue. Then we could also look at, basically federalism, okay? Federalism and states' rights, okay? Strict versus loose construction. Okay. So what I'm doing here is that I'm noting that economic issues were there, but I also want to get into political issues. Okay. We also can get into foreign policy. Now, remember that Washington, chose a foreign policy of neutrality. Okay. So Washington said that we should remain neutral in the wars of the French Revolution. And so, but there are plenty of economic considerations here. So tariffs, okay, because, tariffs, Hamilton wanted tariffs to support manufacturing. And so we can see there, as far as what's going on, that we would bring in economic causes. We would also bring in political causes. Now, the effects of this are not necessarily, that big of a deal here. But also, though, we could think about if we consider free speech. Okay, so we can't cover everything in 9 hours that we have here. But when we think about free speech, the Alien and Sedition Acts, okay, so we could say here that the effects here, that the debates over, especially, I would say, the free speech element and the Alien Sedition Acts, I could go into the effects that, the effects of all of these things are going to lead to the election of, eventually lead to the election of Jefferson as president. Now, I could also go into the effects of the two-party system, and that's where I could go into the Alien and Sedition Acts, the revolutions of 1800, and that sort of thing. So, I'm thinking Euro revolutions of 1848, the revolution of 1800. So I've got a few things that I could use here as evidence, but on here, if I went into the economic and the political causes, for causation, that should be sufficient if I develop these enough to get that complex understanding point, okay? And so as far as that goes, now we might also think about the effects of the two-party system. You could mention perhaps Washington's farewell address. Okay, so farewell address, in which Washington warned about the dangers of faction and the two-party system. So this is a causation prompt again, where one type of cause will be mentioned. Okay, one type of cause will be mentioned, and if you want complex understanding, you would also develop an additional cause, and then you can go into the facts. So once again, this this 3-box method that I've got here can work on any type of any type of LEQ. So let me go ahead and take a look here, see if there are any questions here. Okay, let's go ahead, and we've got a few minutes left. So what have we got here? All right. All right, so let's okay, Kanye. All right, what have we got here? Okay, so can we talk about other causes in body pair? Yeah. So the thing is, wait, what is okay. So the thing is, when it comes down to it, I would spend a paragraph writing about the economic causes. So let me go back to my 3-box method. So the XYZ affair was, of course, that was during the quasi-war between France and the United States. The United States sent diplomats during the Adams administration. They were rebuffed, and that conjured up some anti-French sentiment in the United States. Now, as far as this goes, here is a paragraph. Okay, so I would note some of these economic causes. Okay, so I would note the economic causes. And then, also remember, we could even go into the assumption of debts. But what would be better? You don't want to do too many things here, because if you use too much evidence, then you'll start drive-buying. Okay, you'll start doing a drive-by where you mention the evidence, but you don't develop it. So what I would do here is I would have no more than like 2 or 3 pieces of evidence to support each point, because that's going to guarantee that you develop the evidence. The AP readers would rather see 2 or 3 pieces of, like 2 pieces of evidence in a paragraph, rather than see a bunch of evidence that's not developed. So use a limited amount of evidence and develop it, and that's going to get you more points than if you use a lot of evidence but you don't really develop it and integrate it into your argument. So this would be a paragraph. Okay, this would be a body paragraph. And so this would be another body paragraph. And then if we want to get into effects, then we would do that as a body paragraph as well. And so, the way that this works, and this can also help you frame your thesis. Okay, so if we're going to think about a thesis statement here, evaluate the extent to which economic issues. Okay, so we could say here that although economic issues were a major factor, were a major factor causing the two-party system. Okay, the economic issues, were a major factor in the development of the first two-party system. Political issues. Okay, so political issues. Now, one thing to make this a little better, economic issues such as the national bank. Okay, so such as the national bank, if you want to make that a little bit more, complex there. Political issues dealing with the understanding of the Constitution. Okay, also, were a, were a factor splitting Federalist and Jeffersonian Republicans. Okay, so the thing is, what I've done here is I've gone ahead and I've previewed these points that I'm about to make. So I'm noting the economic and the political. But then again, you could say something like this. Okay, you could say economic issues, such as the national bank and manufacturing, were a major factor, and that would get you an adequate thesis. Okay, so they were a major factor in this. Okay, so that's something that you could go into. You could go into that, but you can also, you don't necessarily have to bring in another factor for an the regular point. This is if you're going for complex understanding. So what we could say is that economic issues were a major factor in the development of the first two-party system. Economic issues, such as, you could go into such as the national bank, the tariffs, and manufacturing were a major factor in the development of the first two-party system. Now, this would be an adequate thesis statement. Now, it wouldn't necessarily be getting me that complex understanding for bringing in another cause, but I could write an essay and score some points, dealing exclusively with that. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, okay, so as far as that goes, let's see what we've got here. All right, not dodging the prompt, taking a, let's see. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, okay. Now, I don't think, though, that like making, economic, it's not necessarily economic or political issues, but you go into both. All right, so as far as that goes, ladies and gentlemen, I think that Washington, certainly Jefferson would say that Washington leaned more toward Hamilton, but we are out of time. These are one our webinars. Jessica, if you'll hit me up on Twitter, I would love to chat with you some more on this. It sounds like you're working very hard on this. My Twitter is at Tom Richey. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we did it on my channel tonight because of technical difficulties, but the rest of these webinars are going to be offered through the Bill of Rights Institute. There is a link in the bio or in the video description. So make sure to take a look at that because I'm going to be going back to the Bill of Rights Institute to do this tomorrow. Now, while I will also, though, I am going to be doing some more things on my channel, so stay tuned for that. And, you will hear from me plenty next week. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, it is always a pleasure, and I will be, be back tomorrow, but I will be broadcasting with the Bill of Rights Institute. I'll see y'all tomorrow.